Have you ever seen someone carry the weight of the world, yet ask for nothing more than a glass of water? A man who once stood tall in uniform now sat forgotten on a dusty roadside. The world passed him by, cold, hurried, and blind. But then a small boy stopped, and what he did next changed that veteran's life forever. The late afternoon sun beat down on the small town streets. Cars rushed past, their windows rolled up, their drivers lost in their own worlds. On a weathered bench near the bus stop sat an old man. His clothes were faded, his boots worn, and his back slightly bent from years of service. This man was James Miller, a veteran who once served proudly in the Army. His medals lay tucked away in a small wooden box at home, gathering dust, while the man who had earned them now struggled to find his place in a world that had moved on without him. James lived alone in a small one-room apartment. His days were long and quiet, filled with memories of friends who never came back and a silence that grew louder with every year. He wasn't asking for pity. He wasn't asking for money. But on this day, beneath the burning sun, his body was weak. His lips were dry, and all he wanted was water. He leaned on his cane and slowly made his way to a small convenience store. Inside, he looked at the shelves lined with bottled water. He reached into his pocket, fingers trembling, only to pull out a few coins, barely enough to buy a small bottle. The cashier gave him a quick glance, her expression indifferent, before turning back to her phone. James picked up the cheapest bottle, placed it on the counter, and slid his coins across. The cashier sighed, counted the change, and pushed the bottle toward him without a word. The man thanked her softly, though she didn't look up. Walking outside, James sat back on the bench. He twisted the cap open, took a small sip, and closed his eyes. For a moment he felt relief, but it didn't last long. The heat pressed against him. His head grew light, and the loneliness in his chest ached more than the thirst ever did. People walked past him, some glancing quickly, others avoiding eye contact altogether. To them, he was just another old man sitting on a bench, unnoticed, unimportant. But behind those tired eyes was a story of sacrifice, courage, and love for a country that now seemed to have forgotten him. James looked down at his hands, hands that had once held rifles, saluted proudly, and written letters home filled with hope. Now they shook as he tried to steady the bottle. He whispered to himself, just a little more strength, just a little more time. But little did he know. Someone was about to notice him. Someone who saw more than an old man on a bench. Someone whose small act would touch his heart in ways he never imagined. As the minutes passed, James felt his strength slipping. The sun was relentless, and every breath seemed heavier than the last. He wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand, trying to sit upright. But his body betrayed him, and he leaned forward, coughing softly. A group of teenagers walked by, their laughter echoing in the street. One of them pointed and whispered something, making the others chuckle. James heard them, though they probably thought he didn't. It stung, not because of what they said, but because it reminded him how invisible he had become. He once commanded respect. He once stood tall as others saluted him. Now he was just the old man on the bench. His chest tightened, not from illness but from a heavy sadness that had grown over the years. He thought of his old friends, his unit, and the brotherhood that once made him feel alive. At least back then, he murmured. Someone cared if I lived or died. Cars zoomed by, drivers sipping their iced drinks, air conditioners blasting, music playing loud. Not one person stopped. Not one asked if he was okay. The bottle of water in his hand was nearly empty. He tilted it back, but only a few drops touched his lips. He closed his eyes, his throat burning, his body weary. A thought crept into his mind, a thought that scared him. What if this is how it ends? Sitting here forgotten, thirsty, alone? The world blurred around him as he fought to stay awake. He tried to push away the darkness in his mind, but the more he tried, the heavier it grew. Just then, a small shadow appeared in front of him. A boy, no older than 10, stood holding an ice-cold bottle of water. His face was innocent, his eyes wide with concern. "Sir, are you okay?" the boy asked softly. James blinked, surprised. No one had spoken to him like that in a long time. He tried to smile, but his lips were too dry. "I'm fine, son. Just a little tired." But the boy didn't believe him. He unscrewed the cap and gently placed the bottle in James's hands. "Here, this is for you." James stared at it, then at the boy. I can't take this from you." The boy shook his head firmly. "Please, my mom always says, if someone's thirsty, you give them water. Everyone deserves water." And in that moment, James felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. James took the bottle, his hands trembling. He lifted it to his lips and drank. The water was cool, refreshing, almost life-giving. Tears welled in his eyes, not because of the water itself, but because of the boy's kindness. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't know what this means to me," the boy smiled brightly. "You're welcome, sir. My name's Daniel." James smiled faintly. "I'm James." Daniel sat beside him, swinging his legs from the bench. He wasn't in a hurry to leave. "Are you a soldier?" he asked, pointing to James's faded army cap. James nodded slowly. "I was a long time ago." Daniel's eyes widened. "That's so cool! My grandpa was a soldier too. Mom says soldiers are heroes." The word hero hit James like a wave. It had been so long since anyone called him that. He had lived years thinking he was just another forgotten old man. But to this child, he was still someone who mattered. For the next few minutes, Daniel asked questions. What the army was like, if James had traveled far, if he had friends there. James answered softly, his voice steadying with every word. For the first time in years, he felt like someone cared about his story. Soon, Daniel's mother approached carrying a grocery bag. She looked concerned at first, but when she saw the two talking, her expression softened. James stood slowly, leaning on his cane. He tried to thank her for raising such a kind boy, but his voice broke. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You don't need to thank me. He just did what was right." Before leaving, Daniel handed James a small folded note. "This is for you, so you don't forget me." When James opened it later, tears filled his eyes again. On the paper was a simple drawing, a soldier standing tall, with the words, "Thank you for being a hero," written underneath in shaky, childlike handwriting. That night, James placed the note in the same box as his medals. For the first time in years, the box didn't feel like a coffin of memories. It felt alive again. From that day on, James walked with a little more strength. Not because his body had healed, but because his heart had. He wasn't invisible anymore. A child had seen him, respected him, and reminded him that his life still mattered. And sometimes, all it takes is a single act of kindness to remind someone they're not forgotten. One boy, one bottle of water, one life forever changed. Kindness doesn't always come from the strongest hands, but from the purest hearts. You never know how far a simple gesture can reach, because to someone it could mean the world. Be that someone, today.